I cannot begin to imagine how the families in this case feel today. I just hope that today's verdicts bring all of them some peace of mind for the future, and that we have answered some of the questions that they were looking for. Cheshire Constabulary will continue to support all of the families in this case in the coming days and weeks ahead. There will be a period of reflection as everybody comes to terms with what they've experienced here today.
When we got this, it's not a secret because it's been in the media and everything that Lucy Letby had been moved off the ward. The deaths and collapses had stopped. The immediate question for me, once I'd said, yeah, we'll investigate that, was, well, why don't you go and arrest her right now? Which was a good question, quite difficult not to answer. But ultimately, we've seen many times in investigations like this where we've gone the wrong way. Police nationally have gone the wrong way, jumped into a suspect. Now, my view of that was, by investigating that it could be anyone means we're not focused on one person. So investigating that it could be anything means we're not focused on any one event, which means that when you come later on and the defence want to attack your investigation for being, you chose it was Lucy Letby, you chose it was this event. No, we didn't choose that, and we didn't choose that. Actually, I had a choice. I'd have wanted the experts to come back and said, we found it, it was a bad bug in the water and that happened. I could tell parents that it was tragic, but this is not murder. I'm Detective Superintendent Paul Hughes, Senior Investigating Officer with Operation Hummingbird. What I was presented with was effectively a number of reports written in medical jargon that tried to explain why babies had collapsed and why there was effectively a spike in numbers at the Countess of Chester Hospital. For me, there was more questions than answers, so I determined that we should investigate.
You don't often hear of multiple child, baby, infant deaths. They are extremely rare. One is rare enough as it is and tragic enough, but if you have a number of potential babies who have died or have been harmed, it is absolutely hugely important. I'm Detective Superintendent Simon Blackwell. I'm the strategic lead, or PIP4, for the investigation. These things are far from routine. They're extreme, even nationally, internationally, very rare. So to hear that there may be allegations of such or concern at a hospital in our area was a huge thing.
The way we work on MIT is, as a team, we go and take actions and come back and deliver them actions. But this was different. It was a different investigation. So we had to go back, scrap that. So I made the decision to give each detective their own investigation.
I remember going into the office and when I first joined and speaking to Paul at length, I knew that there was going to be a case to answer, because otherwise he wouldn't be gathering people in. I was given a couple of babies to investigate, and one of them, they were the twins, one of which is an insulin case. And it was very quickly obvious that someone, whether it be Letby or not, someone had administered insulin to this particular baby.
The investigation team realised that they needed expert witnesses to help them with the investigation. They got in touch with the National Crime Agency. So they have a list or a database of expert witnesses. They provide the vital key evidence for the investigation. They also advise us as police officers on medical terminology or medical practices, because we are police officers. We didn't have any idea, or I certainly didn't have any idea about any kind of medical terms or even what to look for within these medical records. Not many investigations have so many expert witnesses, and not many investigations rely on so many opinions of these expert witnesses. So it's a total unique role to policing. I'm Detective Sergeant Lucy Kennedy. I'm part of Operation Hummingbird. When I joined the investigation and started looking through every bit of evidence that we've got, I think it then becomes apparent of just the severity of the investigation. In total, there are 8 main expert witnesses, and we also have an independent nurse advisor. In July 2017, there was a meeting held with the expert witness. From there, we had then the massive task of putting together the medical bundles for him to look through for all the different cases that we wanted him to review. It was quite a challenging task, that because it's been described as the medical files have just been thrown up in the air and put back together. It's just the way they were brought to us, and we aren't medical experts, we're not even medically minded, so it was hard for us to fathom how to put this medical bundle together, which also was a challenge for the expert who then received it to go through. Like, some of these medical records are 1,000 pages long, because some of the babies had been in the unit for weeks or months. We then took it to him for him to review, and he would decide whether there was a suspicious case or a non-suspicious case.
What we found out was, in neonatal infants, it's very clear that they know when a baby's going to collapse and die, and parents are already prepared for that. And that neonatal units, which my expectation was that it's full of sick babies that could die at any moment, it's actually not. So they explained that these babies do not die. So if a baby collapses, it's usually expected, and even on the outside chance of it being unexpected, it's always explainable. What separated this collection of events away from everything else was that they were unexpected and unexplained, and that was then determined as the key significant factor for me deciding this is not necessarily suspicious at that time, but the events surrounding it needed to be investigated with an open mind. We eventually received signed statements from Dr. Evans, who was our primary lead witness, and Dr. Evans had defined in his statements that he thought the children had been harmed by infliction, and a variety of different methods for that. And then at the same time, the analytical product had been coming together and the investigative product had been coming together, so it reconstructed. So at that point I knew that in most cases we'd been able to prove already that Lucy Letby was present. There was more work to be done, and I could prove that it was inflicted harm.
My opinion was very quickly that yes, there was something not right, and yes, the only obvious person was Lucy Letby.
So the 3 things we wanted to try and draw together was medically what happened. Do we have a murder? Do we have a natural occurring death? Secondly, what did that shift look like? That was the timely bit, because you're taking statements of nurses and doctors, and then the analytical part, which was phenomenal work done by Claire and Kate on building that factual evidence, which is, we know Lucy Letby was present, we know, more importantly, other people weren't.
I'm Claire Hocknall. I'm one of the intelligence analysts on Operation Hummingbird. As an analyst, I would have been in the past been expected to take part in strategic work in terms of establishing threat areas across the force, but also deployed to operational responsibilities. So, in terms, if there was a series of burglaries or a drugs conspiracy, I'd be involved in looking at the data behind which supported that investigation and trying to really interrogate that data, see what it tells us, what evidence it gives us, and put that into a product to help the investigation team, if it was a proactive job, or if it was reactive, putting together a product so that the investigation team, the Crown Prosecution Service, and then ongoing into the court process can actually understand that information, preparing a sequence of events which may involve call logs, it might be maps of locations, it might include CCTV, but this job hasn't been like that. Primarily, it was a case of looking at what data was available at that time. Mainly it was, and it still is, medical records. I've soon found out that a lot of that medical data was scanned in PDF format, and it was just going to be a manual extraction of data. So I just had to apply the methodology to just reading through and picking it out manually. With this investigation, is that your subconscious is constantly searching for the reason for it not to be her. Even you could go months just methodically working through, overlaying, creating sequences, and then you'll read something and just it like wins you a bit, and you think, God, she really has done this, and you kind of have to separate yourself out from how you feel about it. You've got to do the work. You've got to give it justice, as to what's happened. You've got to remain impartial, and that's how we've managed to, how I've managed to continue for nearly 6 years that I've been working on it.
I'm going to declare now it's criminality. Tell parents, so we're going to bring parents in and tell them for the first time we think their baby's been murdered and attempted to be murdered. Many with twins, triplets, siblings, all affected.
We initially went out to speak to, I think about 28 families then, and we were all given a formal words to explain to the families that there will be an investigation from this period of time. Your child was born there, or sadly some of them passed away there, and we would be looking into the circumstances around that. I'm Michelle Burkett. I'm a family liaison officer, and I'm also a family liaison coordinator. So they were told very little at the beginning because we didn't know anything at the beginning.
Horrific for the parents to have to deal with, because in my view, in a case that's gone on like this so long, they've dealt with the loss of their child, and then again and again and again. More trauma. Each time we do something, each time we arrest, each time we make a decision, each time we charge, parents are reliving. At that point, a difficult decision to make. In fact, the hardest decision to make of my career, I think it's fair to say, at that time, and probably still so. Do I arrest Lucy Letby for multiple murders and attempted murders?
So come to 2018, we were at the point in the summer there that we were in a decision where we had a suspect. We believed there was criminality that had happened against a number of babies, some of which had died. And the next stage then, balancing risks and reward, was to arrest and effect an arrest. And against potential ramifications of saying publicly, because the arrest would become public, that we have a child serial killer. So that is not something that you want to get wrong.
We have today arrested a healthcare professional. She was arrested this morning on suspicion of the murder of 8 babies and the attempted murder of a further 6, and currently remains in custody.
The families were all told of the first arrest. You're knocking on the door and you're turning their life back upside down again. They've already gone through the bereavement of saying goodbye to their lost child, and then you're knocking on the door and telling them, well, somebody's responsible for your baby not being here anymore, or somebody's responsible for what's happened to your daughter or son, and the condition that they're in now. Their reactions varied. Disbelief, some of them, because some of the families had gone on and raised money for charity for the unit, and just couldn't believe that somebody could be responsible for what's happened to them. And then some of the families, I knew something was wrong. I knew something wasn't right. I knew my child was not right. Family liaison officers were brought in as a point of contact between the family and the investigation. Rather than a family member having 12 different detectives phoning them with 12 different bits of information, they have a single point of contact.
You are the link between the investigation and the families involved, so the victim side of the family. So I'm Detective Sergeant Danielle Stonier. I've got 18 years service and I currently work on Operation Hummingbird. It's a really difficult and challenging role, but also really rewarding as well. So you're there to kind of keep them updated about the investigation, speak to them and gain any evidence that they've got to offer if you need to get statements. A lot of these families haven't had any involvement with the police in general, let alone an investigation. So it's about making sure they understand every step of the process and feel supported and that they feel informed.
It's not all done on day one, it's done in little steps. First initial contact is made, and sometimes you can be the one that's actually breaking the news, that you're knocking on the door of somebody. You're very aware that you're going to change their life forever. You are there giving them bad news that their daughter, son has been killed, and you take them through the whole process to visiting them in the mortuary, explaining the circumstances of how they have died. In this particular incident, in investigation, a lot of the family liaison officers didn't have to do that. It was more about explaining to the families of what's happening, when it's happening, and why the period of time is sometimes lengthy.
I've been a family liaison officer for a number of years and no job has been the same and no family has been the same that I've supported, and it can look very differently. People's needs are very different, so it's really important to kind of set out an understanding at the start so they're aware of what they can expect from me, but also what I will be looking at from them. So it can be something simple as, how often do you want me to phone you to check in? You know, do you want to be contacted every week? Even if I've got no information, do you still want a call? Or, you know, do you just want me to call you? Any pertinent points?
The arrest was planned for the purpose of obtaining evidence by questioning. Obviously, our evidence and our statistical analysis showed that Lucy let being present to everything. So there is, in effect, she's a suspect, but she's also the key source of information. She knows more about this case than anyone else because our evidence would suggest that she's been there. Because of the very size of the investigation, it took that time, it took that first year, 14 months to build enough evidence to put us in a position where we could, you know, ask her realistic questions and have some pretty robust knowledge about what we know has gone on.
It's really difficult to explain the depth in which the investigation has gone through in such a short period of time. To put that into some context, when the interviews took place, it was really important that every single baby was covered in as much detail as possible because that's what they deserve. They deserve for us to have completely covered their case. And it is about them and it is about their parents. I am Nicola Evans, I'm the Detective Chief Inspector with Chester Constabulary, and I'm the Deputy Senior Investigating Officer on Operation Hummingbird. I was deployed onto the operation in March 2018, which was a little while after the investigation commenced. And my role initially was as a specialist interview advisor in relation to how we obtained evidence from witnesses and also how we interviewed the suspect.
They told me that there had been a lot more deaths and that I'd been linked to somebody that was there for a long time. Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rate? Yes. Okay, so tell me about that. What concerns did you have? I think we don't just notice as a team in general, and staff, that this was a rise compared to previous years.
Those interviews took a great deal of time to ensure that they were meaningful, they were direct, but also that all of the evidence had been put to the suspect in the correct way so that it could be used later on during the trial.
Those first interviews are really, really important because it's when they first become aware of a police investigation and potentially that they're being classed as suspect.
When Lucy Letby was first arrested and the material that came back into the investigation room at that time, we just, minds blew. It was like, wow, this is her life.
the amount of evidence we recovered from her home address was just not expected. So thousands and thousands of documents, many devices that led to downloads of 500,000 pages of information that we didn't expect to find. We didn't expect her to have kept a catalogue year on year on year.
Going through her phone, and I can't remember the name of the article, but it resonated with me when I read it, is as human beings, we all are more alike than we are different. So reading through her phone, it was remarkably normal for a lot of it. And it's not until you overlay the times and dates of some of the things that she's saying in text messages or whatever, WhatsApp messages, is that it's the timing of it as well as what she's saying that really you can pick up those patterns, and as an analyst that's what you're trying to find is patterns to things.
Between 18 and 19 particularly, that was the key focus. All the evidence that we covered from the addresses, more medical evidence, pathology, more peer review work, but the review of the exhibits found at the address took a long time, and then what came from that is a load of inquiries, external inquiries across the country, different parts of the country, tracking people down who'd known Lucy. As we started building up a suspectology, if you like, of history of her, trying to look for, in any way, shape, or form, answers to maybe why. We needed to ask her more questions, but subsequently 3 further cases of attempted murder by this time had been identified. So we wanted to ask her about them, and also we knew that she would write a lot. And she did. We'd seen it during the first arrest. So we wanted to arrest her and see what she'd been writing about maybe in the year that we've been investigating.
When Miss Letby was arrested for the second time, I was tasked with planning and coordinating the search of her home address in Chester. My name is Rob Woods. I'm a Detective Inspector on Operation Hummingbird. My primary and sole role now is the lead for disclosure in the investigation. The amount of material we found at her home address was, I think, a massive surprise to us when she was first arrested, but it gave us a really good steer on the second occasion as to what sort of things we were looking for. So as an example, something that's proved very useful to the inquiry has been Miss Letby's diaries. There appeared to be, and it became clear later that it was almost a code of coloured asterisks and various other things put in a diary that marked significant events in our investigation. So when we went to search the address for the second occasion, that was something that we knew we were looking for because we didn't have the complete chronology. There were a couple of years missing, so that was a very clear item. We also knew that she was a copious writer of notes now we thought that perhaps having been arrested she might stop doing that. It turned out when we searched that second address she had continued to write her thoughts and all sorts of processes about the investigation, about the events that she was being investigated for. So yeah, we seized quite a large amount of material on that second search.
During the course of the investigation, Operation Hummingbirds generated over 4,500 exhibits. They're spread over 130 scenes. Our day-to-day business is to ensure that the exhibits recovered are stored safely, are processed, and the information that they may contain are disseminated to other investigators. During the trial, there have been a number of incidents where the prosecution counsel have requested an exhibit at short notice to be shown to the court. You can imagine trying to find something, one item within 4,500 can be quite daunting. So we have a process where we're able to identify where the exhibit's been placed, where it's been stored, to ensure that we can recover it quickly and efficiently. During the course of the operation, the police searched Lucy Letby's property on 4 occasions, during which items of significance were recovered. Some were medical notes, medical records relating to patients at the hospital. Obviously, searching officers were aware that this sensitive information shouldn't have been in a domestic setting, So that was recovered. I think in total we recovered 257 individual A4 pieces of paper that list patients' names and their conditions.
Then she was released. The frustrations came on the release. They wanted to know why, and it was all about getting the evidence together.
You could see why at the time, and it was all because we needed to get the evidence as strong as possible for the charges, and you can see why the CPS lawyer involved made that decision to keep on rebailing her. But for me, those were low points in my role as a family liaison officer, because we needed to make those phone calls and try and explain why her bail was being extended for another 6 months on top, and it's going to be 6 months until we reach that next milestone of the investigation of potentially Lucy Letby being charged.
The third arrest in November 2020 was because we had exhausted sufficient lines of inquiry, and that's where we were really, because if we got any further, we'd have probably lost the opportunity to interview her at the final time, and we wanted to ask some questions, and the Crown Prosecution Service wanted us to ask some questions. But if you get too far and you're already in a position where you will charge, then PACE only allows you to clarify some things. It doesn't allow you to investigatively question. So it was that balance where we were almost satisfied, but not quite. And we had conversations with the CPS. It just seemed at the time was right. The stars had aligned in evidential process, and we arrested her. And at that third point, we had every intention of arresting her and seeking charge advice, and being successful with getting charge advice.
I coordinated, planned and executed, if you like, the third and final arrest of Miss Letby at her home address in Hereford. Again, it's something that I remember very clearly. There was a lot of planning that went into it, because the worst thing would have been to turn up in Hereford and her not be there, or us not be able to arrest her. So there was a massive amount of planning. But ultimately, the whole of the team here, all of the interview team, all of the search teams, all of the investigative team were all waiting for me to make that call and say, yes, she's under arrest and she's on her way back. So I don't think I slept a lot the night before. I remember getting up very early, 3 o'clock in the morning. We met at Blacon and we drove down. It's an hour and a half, 2 hours, even at that time in the morning. Gave me a lot of time to ruminate and think about what could go wrong. I do remember having a great relief when we knocked on the door. Mr. Letby opened the door, and it was all very low key, obviously. Despite the severity of this investigation, it's not a suspect that posed a great deal of risk to us as police officers, so it was a very low key arrest, a gentle knock on the door. We went in, we explained why we were there. They knew because they'd been through it twice before. Miss Letby's mum was very distressed, but Miss Letby herself, she complied and was very subdued. Did I know that we were going to be getting charges? No, I didn't. Did I know that we were going to be asking for charging advice? Yes, I did. And again, I think that just added a little bit of extra weight to, we must get this right. So everything must be done absolutely by the book. The procedure must be perfect, because this will be scrutinised at court and it'll be scrutinised by the defence. And I didn't want to let the team down, because as I say, if we'd messed up that initial bit of arresting, all the other planning and all the other bits, the team that were waiting would have been for nothing if we'd not secured her. So yeah, I do remember the door closing on the BMW that she was going to be driven back up to Chester in, and her pulling away, and me phoning Detective Inspector Hughes, as he was at the time, and saying, yep, job done, she's in the car, she's on the way. That was definitely a moment of, can relax a little bit.
After we'd finished the last lot of interviews with Lucy Letby, there was a team of us working upstairs in the custody unit, 7 or 8 of us in there. It was intense. It was intense because we were going to the CPS and we were going to seek charging authority at that point. And also we were all just praying that we did have enough at that point. And we were confident we did. We'd already had early indications that she would be looking to charge.
A key moment for me really was the charge, at the charge stage of the case. And until that point, we were working really hard as a really small team on this case, and also not talking about it elsewhere and to anybody else, because it was really important that we kept the integrity of the investigation of the exhibits, of everything that we've found, and to ensure that when the trial did come around, that it was a fair trial. And so once we got to the point of charge, it felt like a really momentous occasion, that actually now we told the Crown Prosecution Service and we'd gone through the evidence with them and that they'd authorised those charges. And that was really a big day for the police team, and clearly for the families in the case, it was huge.
And I remember the phone ringing. Nicola Evans sat opposite me. She picked up the phone, and you could tell from the conversation she was having that the CPS were telling her that the email was on her way to her with the charging advice. CPS didn't say which way that charging advice had gone. And I remember her putting the phone down, looking at Paul, saying, "It's here." There was then maybe a minute, I don't know, of silence while she read it. And I remember her just looking at Paul and saying, "All of them. She's charging all of them." There was no celebration. We did shake hands, and there was kind of almost a relief. I don't know whether they'll thank me for telling you this or not, but Paul and Nicola felt that they simply wouldn't be able to give the team that news. I said that I thought I would be able to do it. I wasn't sure, if I'm honest, but I said I would be able to do it. And about 5 minutes later, we called the whole team into the office and we told them that we had the charging advice in, and I stood and I read out charges relating to the 17 cases individually.
The charges read out and didn't know what people would do. You know, would people clap, cheer, celebrate, cry? And it was nothing. It was nothing as in it was absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Nobody said anything. Some people became emotional, took themselves out of the room. People left the room to spend some time on their own. And it was probably sort of like 10-15 minutes really before anybody said anything. It was almost like, you know, everybody's, instead of being something to celebrate, I think it felt like a profound loss. I think it was that realization when you heard it in that context. All these babies have been murdered. I think there was a realization of actually people who have children of their own, who have seen their own children grow up, what that actually means now. We're saying that these children would have all had their lives had they not been murdered or damaged or affected or inflicted by an attempted murder by Lucy Letby.
There was actually just an overwhelming feeling of sadness. Everybody had worked to that point and almost looked forward to getting to a point where we could tell the families this is what was happening, but it actually was an overwhelming feeling of just a real sadness, really, to kind of a watershed as to what had happened, and that we were going to take this case to trial and everything that meant for the people involved.
And I remember it really well. There was myself and my colleague Kev Lee, who I'd interviewed with. We were stood in the custody area at the back, and Lucy Letby was brought out of a cell, and it was another colleague who read out those charges to her in custody. Because of the number of charges, it took a while. And hearing those names and hearing each individual charge was a bizarre feeling, if I'm honest. As I say, it was a feeling of reality that this is happening. Getting a case, an investigation trial ready as such is on a totally different scale. So as much as everybody was grateful to get to that point, the reality hit that this is when the hard work really does start now.
Looking back at what we've all been through, and I've been a family liaison officer for a very long time. There was one point where we had to go out and inform all the families that she'd been charged. And we also had to go out and inform those families prior to the charge of her arrest and what we were looking at, the fact that she may well be responsible or is responsible for the death of their children. And you do that when on a murder. You'll drive along to the family, you'll knock on their door and you'll introduce yourself and you'll explain to them what you're there for and the circumstances around it. And then you'll spend time with them explaining what's happening and the process that's going to come after. Then we get back in the car and we normally go home. We had to do that 5 times. We had to go once, gather your thoughts, then go another time. And I explain this to to a colleague, I said, how did you feel that night? And he said it was one of the most emotional draining things he's ever had to do. And that was a difficult challenge for us as individuals. From memory, some of the families, their reactions, you can't say joy. It wasn't joy. They'd been waiting a long time for it. That there was tears. There's no happiness. They just want somebody to be held responsible for whatever happened to either their child, the collapse, or their child not being here.
It's that overarching aspect of the families at the heart of what we do. It was so important for us as a team that they got their time in court and it wasn't affected by clerical or administration errors or errors in evidence. And where is everything we've done so far going to get its most stringent test? And it's right there in a courtroom. Probably a 10% excited it was getting started and a 90% nervousness that it runs well. Work sort of starts now again in preparation for what's going to be a massive trial. Make sure that the disclosure machine swings into action really, and the amount of challenges we believed we had really became a reality at charge. But because we'd sort of allocated a number of events to individual officers, there was a real team ethic and a real team bond that I don't believe I've worked with before. I've worked with some terrific teams in my career, but this team on this job, people were doing it because they had such a vested interest. I genuinely believe if you'd said to people, we're not paying you, they'd have still come in.
When you charge someone with a crime and you're going to go to court, you have evidence. So you have statements, you have exhibits, you have documents, you have officers' reports. And all of those are joined together to form your case. They are your evidence that you say proves that the person on trial is guilty of the offence. However, when you investigate any crime, whether it be a shoplifting or multiple murders as we have here, you also collect a lot of material that isn't evidence, but you still have that material. And disclosure is, in very simple terms, the process of how you deal with all the other material that isn't your evidence. In terms of unused material, which is all of that material that isn't evidence, we're currently standing at 16,571 items. But what has to be remembered, of course, is that some of those items themselves are thousands of pages long. Disclosure is absolutely vital to a fair trial because when you hear of jobs being thrown out of court, the vast majority of those will be because of mistakes or failings in disclosure. Often not deliberate, but mistakes or failings in disclosure is what causes big investigations to fall down.
Post-charge, sort of late 2020, I was able to have discussion with colleagues at the Home Office and submit an appropriate financing bid, if you like, which ultimately means that it's such a huge case of clarity and importance that necessitates extra funding. It's out of mainstream business. The force needs support, and that's enabled the team, plus the support the force has put in the PCC, to grow from sort of single figures to 60 or 70 staff across lots of disciplines, whether it's analytical, administrative, finance, civilian investigators, detectives, to actually be an investigatory body and team, a department in itself, out of mainstream business, give justice and deliver the best investigation we possibly can. It required an approach as how we've managed the witnesses, how we've managed public contact, the information that was coming on, understanding, I suppose, what was happening in the media and the social media. So we did a lot of sort of assessment of what had been done before nationally on large operations and got some good learning or insight, but then tailored an approach that would work for Hummingbird. So we set up a dedicated witness care team. The force and other forces have a good support usually for witness care as the run up to trial, which was good, but it needed bolstering and it needed a real coordinated approach because we had scores and scores and scores of witnesses. So that was a unique thing, and I'd certainly advocate similar for future cases of scale, definitely.
On Operation Hummingbird, we have managed in excess of 100 witnesses, which for me is unprecedented. I've never known this happen in Cheshire Police previously, and in fact I've never known it happen in anywhere across the country. There's no other investigation like this, so it's a privilege to apply for a job and be successful to get on the investigation. I think it was very important to pick the right staff for this role due to dealing with anxieties of all the witnesses, and the staff have been excellent. My role was to engage with the witnesses, speak to the staff at the NNU and explain what we could do for them on the run-up to the trial. The first struggle we had was the anxiety levels of the staff. All of the staff had worked alongside the defendant for a period of time. Some of them were actually friends with her. So we had to get an engagement and build rapport with them. I went in a number of times with my staff to introduce ourselves and to tell them what they could expect from us, what standard of service they could expect. Some of that was initially met with negativity, in so much as we said we'd run every witness to and from court. If they wanted to come independently, we would facilitate that for them. And the initial response is, you won't be able to do that. But I assured them that we would, and we did. We've driven over 15,000 miles transporting witnesses to and from court. The reason for that is the worry going to court and driving home from court. We take that away from them by making sure they get home safe and get to court safe in the morning. They need to give best evidence, achieving best evidence at court. And by us reassuring them, transporting them to and from. And bear in mind, some of these witnesses have come 7 or 8 times. It's not like a normal case where you go and give your evidence once and then you're released.
We envisaged a lot of media interest coming into the investigation. We knew it anyway, but certainly at trial. So we looked at options and decided to create a mini hub, if you like, within the team called the Central Reception Team. And ultimately that was some digital media investigators, some intelligence staff and some detectives. And basically we take the ownership off public contacting the force via emails, potential phones, questions, letters, whatever, into our team so that we could assess it real time.
I'm Detective Inspector Andrea Price. I've been working on Operation Hummingbird for a number of years now. As a detective, you want to overturn every stone and make sure you're giving the absolute best to the families, and I know that's what's happened from day one. We obviously gathered information from other large-scale investigations before the trial to see how they set up their processes, what could we take from them, and any learning that we could implement. And one of those things was visiting the Hillsborough inquiry and the investigation that was run for that. They implemented what was called a central reception team. The reason being because of the volume of both families that were involved in that investigation and also the level of content they were expecting, they set that up separate to the major investigation room because they didn't feel like that would be able to cope. So we decided to bring in the central reception team a couple of months before the trial. So we had the systems in place that we could test and make sure were working before the trial began. And that has been very much used throughout the trial effectively. Rather than going to the control room, any member of the public that contacts Operation Hummingbird goes through to our central reception team, and they monitor and deal with all public inquiries. They monitor and assess any threat, risk or harm relating to social media or our wider digital environment. I mean, obviously the scale and national interest of this investigation has generated a large amount of both national and international media attention. And again, that was one of the reasons we set up the central reception team to both monitor and manage anything to do with the media.
Another really good and innovative area of the business that we've put in place was the embedded consultant support. So we have within the team, led by a local company, consultant psychologist support and appropriate nursing and mental health awareness support. This has been available for all our staff who are dealing with obviously a really emotive and upsetting area of business, child death. And so all the team have the ability to drop in or have structured support, debriefs, interviews and referrals for extra help. And that has been widened to our families. That's been really beneficial and enabled us to retain staff and ensure that everybody can work to their maximum potential.
Being asked to be part of this, it's a huge privilege because it hasn't ever been done before. We've learned a lot really within the last, say, 10 years, the Hillsborough inquests, the Manchester Arena inquiry, and within both of those, I am really pleased to know that there was psychological support available for the families. However, nothing like this, to my knowledge, has ever been done with a criminal trial before. Cheshire Police have definitely invested in the principles of psychological safety, but that being across the board for their staff, but also for families who have been involved in this process. And what we've been able to put in place is a provision of a therapist support who is at court every single day that this trial has been ongoing. That means that they are there on a very informal basis. They are there every morning when the families come in. They are there to be able to provide informal support, listen to how they are experiencing things, and be part of a very informal conversation. That has helped them to build a rapport with those family members, and importantly then to be able to do one-to-one work with the family members if they have decided that is also what they would want to have. And I think as a psychologist, it's the ripples. This is about thinking that an incident, multiple incidents in this case have happened, but the way that that mushrooms out and the way that that affects individuals, families, extended families, communities, organisations, every part of this investigation and people who've been part of it, that will resonate with them. So we set up a strategy where I am here every single week, and on a rotational basis, generally every couple of months, I will see each member of staff and I provide that one-to-one support.
Part of the preparation for the trial was around how the investigation would continue during trials. So even when trials are unfolding and underway, the investigation doesn't stop, and we continue to follow lines of inquiry, we continue to follow up evidence that the witnesses have given, and also that when and if the defendant gives evidence, then we continue to work closely with the CPS and council to ensure that we're following every line of inquiry correctly. So very early on, it became really apparent that we needed a police team within Manchester because the trial was being held at Manchester Crown Court. And so it was really important that we had the correct officers there to be able to support the families who wished to watch the court from that location, and also to support council and the CPS with any further actions that they wished to continue as the investigation continues to move on during the trial.
So I'm Ben Hilton, I'm a detective sergeant and I'm the file team and case management supervisor for Hummingbird. The file team is essentially made up of 3 detectives who act as officers in the case for the 17 individual cases that form the indictment. And they're responsible essentially for the evidence and the file preparation that's involved with each of the 17 cases. So once Lucy Letby had been charged, there was still a huge amount of work that needed to be done to prepare the case for trial. So there were still multiple lines of inquiries that were being followed. Experts were still reviewing cases. There was lots of analytical work ongoing to prepare the sequence of events. And so the file team would periodically prepare large submissions of evidence that we'd send to the CPS. So we'd essentially act as the liaison between the inquiry team and the CPS. And that work carried on all the way up to and during trial, those submissions of evidence. I think the challenge of it has been because of the size and scale of the inquiry, we're essentially dealing with 17 cases of murder and attempt murder in one trial. So everything that we did, all the evidence we prepared, was essentially multiplied by 17.
The case building for Hummingbird is unlike anything that we've done before. There's a set procedure using homes, and the files are built within homes. Everything's done in a specific way, and that's the way we've always done it, murder after murder. It was different for Hummingbird, so we liaised with CPS, and they didn't particularly want it like that. They wanted more of an electronic version in folders and more like the way we did files when we used to handwrite them. When I first joined the job, and we used to handwrite a file and send it off to them.
And a large part of the work that was ongoing in trial preparation was the analytical work. So that was obviously led by our 2 analysts. So they prepared a sequence of events in each of the 17 cases. And one of the other challenges was how do we present the information that's been gathered at trial? Because, you know, in most cases you have something that's visual for a jury. You know, you might have CCTV of an interaction, or photographs of a crime scene, or of injuries, or of weapons. But with the Hummingbird inquiry, there wasn't much in that way. There wasn't much that was visual. There was that real challenge to present the information that we gathered to the jury in a way that they would understand and that was easy for them to follow, because the vast majority of our evidence was medical records, and it's difficult to put that into a format that's easy to understand and that engages the jury. So we instructed an external digital forensics company who had the task of converting the sequence of events that the analyst had produced into a digital product that prosecution counsel could to use to follow the case during trial and present the evidence to the jury.
Having this interactive electronic presentation allows them to look at not only the sequence of events that Kate and I produced, but it's interactive, so that they can click into a record and not only see what we've transcribed, but then go and have a look at the original record by the click of a button to be able to see that original exhibit.
So the trial started on the 4th of October 2022, a much anticipated date that we counted down to in the office, and actually never thought we'd get to when we had hundreds of days written on the board. It felt like a relief that the trial had actually started, but also there was just a lot of anticipation as to how it would unfold, and also nervousness around ensuring that we could properly support the families who were going to listen to some really upsetting and devastating evidence. And so it was a really strange time for the investigation team, because there were so many emotions running alongside us knowing what we had to do in the job we were there to do. And it's kind of trying to keep those emotions separate, because actually our role is to support the families and to support the investigation, and keep our own feelings separate.
So for a long period of time, the families didn't actually know what had happened to their children and their babies and what the case was about. All they knew was that their child had a collapse and died. Some of them had had a collapse and survived, and they didn't realise the enormity of it all. And it's when they've been here in Manchester and listened to the evidence in court, and they've found that it's all overlapped and it's all, you know, the jigsaw puzzles put together, they realise how in-depth the investigation has been. And now understand the reasons why we couldn't tell them a lot of things.
It was really important that each of the cases were explained in detail, methodically and in full, and that every single one of the victims had their case presented as a case within itself. And so if you think about the scale of that, in that we've got 17 victims, so 17 separate murder and attempted murder cases to present to one jury, it was really important that that was done at a really slow speed, so that people could understand, but also that each of those victims had the time that was needed to explain their case, and that the parents felt that that case was explained correctly and methodically. And so the trial has gone on longer than we expected it to.
Because Kate and I took responsibility for the different cases, once you got in there and started giving evidence, it was fine. I think the anticipation of giving evidence is much worse than actually being in there and doing it. I think both of us would concede that going through the sequence of events of one of the deaths was more difficult because you knew what was coming, and the families are sat behind you when you're giving evidence, and particularly when you're reading through text messages that let be as either sent or received, and the connotations that come out of that, how upsetting it is to be able to say those words out loud. I've read them don't know how many times, but to say them out loud, it brings what's black and white into full technicolor, and at times we've had to kind of really take a deep breath and just get to the end, but knowing that that's the first time that the families have heard that evidence was quite tough.
There is an attachment from the investigation team to each of the cases, and so the anticipation throughout the prosecution case particularly of each of those cases, and how tense I think everybody felt to make sure that that case came out in the best possible way, and that we had done everything that we possibly could to make sure the jury could understand and did each of those babies the justice that they deserved. It was a really intense time, so when we did get to the end of the prosecution case, it did feel like a key moment within the trial, although there have been many ups and downs during that. And it was an anticipated date that we kind of worked towards, and when we actually got to it, actually the feeling was, we've got to carry on, we've got to keep going, and that the work didn't stop there. Although it's been a really long, protracted trial for everybody involved, it's been really important that everybody remains focused on the job that in hand and that they're doing, and the whole team have. The trial has been challenging for everybody involved, not least the families, who I just can't begin to imagine how they feel. The way in which they've sat through the case and they've listened, they're in such a dignified, compassionate way. It's really humbling to be around them, and the way in which they've conducted themselves has just really been overwhelming.
When Letby first got in the box and started giving her evidence, there was a real mix of emotions, and some families were relieved that she was actually in the box giving the evidence, hearing the answers to the questions, and I think some were angry with the answers, and I think some were upset as well for various different reasons as to why they were upset.
Many of the people who were at the trial have worked on this investigation since the very early days, and I think although we have a job to do and it is our job, I also don't think that anybody will be the same person they were when this trial is finished, because there's been such an emotional attachment also to ensuring that we do everything correctly and that we have put this case in the best possible position for it to go to trial. And I think that there'll be a part of that stays with everybody that's worked on it throughout.